Okay, I'm turning on the recording.
Okay.
Hi, Dan. How you doing today?
I'm pretty good. I'm fiddling with my computer too, so.
Okay. Well, we are here to interview you about beekeeping and see all that you know. So, I've been mentoring with you for about a year now, over a year actually. And how much experience do you have?
I've been doing this. This is my 7th year.
7th year. And how many hives do you currently have, or how many hives have you had at the one time at most?
Well, my peak was 58. Right now I'm running about 30, 38, 39, somewhere in there. Best guess. I don't count them.
No, that's all good.
I don't.
Yeah. No, it's all good. I mean, more than 2 hives is pretty amazing. But anyways,
You'll get there.
yeah. So, I want to start off talking about what it's like in the everyday life of a bee. Can you walk me through that?
Well, as far as a bee, what their life consists of is pretty much routine. They're going to wake up in the morning. When the light first hits the hive, it's going to start warming up the hive. When the light first breaks through the entrance, some of the forager bees are going to be the first out the door, and they're going to start going and looking for nectar. Nectar flows at different times of the day, so different flowers open early, different flowers open later in the day or earlier in the day, and they'll know which ones to go to, and that's just how the day starts.
And then they turn that nectar into honey?
Yeah, they dry it out. Nectar is usually, depending on the floral source, it can be anywhere between 10% and about 33% sugar. So they'll get that, and then the hive itself generates heat, just like any other living thing, and that causes the nectar to dry out.
Mm-hmm.
The bee's honey stomach, because bees actually physically have 2 stomachs, their honey stomach will actually inject, it's invertees, but it's a special type for bees, because you can manufacture invertees as well.
What's an invertee?
Invertees takes the sugar, okay, and inverts it into a more stable type of sugar. Kind of hard to describe.
Yeah, no, it's all good. I should probably mention this now, but you work for a chemical company. You're also pretty much basically a chemical engineer without the certifications. So I'm just going to make that very clear now so everyone knows that he pretty much knows what he's talking about.
Chemical end of things, yeah, I get that. But basically the bees use a chemical process to invert the sugar. And by inverting the sugar, it makes it easier for them to digest, as well as being a little more shelf-stable in the hive itself. The reason honey doesn't go bad is because honey is a densified sugar liquid. It's actually so much sugar that the osmotic pressure of cell walls for things that want to live in the sugar can't survive in it. Not to mention there's a fair amount of gluconic acid, and gluconic acid on contact with organic substances turns into peroxide. Have you ever noticed on the top of a good quality honey, it looks like there's kind of like a white film, like a white bubbles, real fine bubbles?
No, I've never seen that, but you've told me about that, yeah.
Fair enough. That is actually peroxide.
And you can eat that?
Only because it's a very small amount. It's enough to keep it sterile, but not enough to eat your stomach.
And honey that doesn't have it is also sterile, or?
It is, but again, remember, it's different. Floral sources have different characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
A good example is if you were to go down to, New Zealand, they have a type of honey called Maluka, and Maluka honey is so full of peroxide that it will give you a bellyache. Okay? Versus up here in Ohio, we have a honey, the Leiden tree, and Leiden honey is very flavorful, but Leiden honey has just about no peroxide in it, so it doesn't have the longest shelf stability of any of the honeys.
Oh.
It's longer than lifetime, but it's still not,
So, what is it like inside the hive. So we talked about the foragers going out and getting the honey, but that's only a very small percent, or a very small percent of the overall everyday life of the bee. There's the nurse bees, and then there's the queen, and I'm sure everyone's dying to know about that.
Well, again, it kind of, it's a more complicated question than you think it is, because there's things going on in different levels in the hive. So you've got your queen bee. You know, everybody knows about the queen. A queen will live anywhere between, well, it depends on how well she's raised and how she's bred, but generally her active lifetime will be between 3 and 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
Generally speaking, they're not going to live longer than that. Most beekeepers replace their queen every other year or every year. I usually go every other. The reason is that when a queen is first mated and starts hatching, she'll lay anywhere between 1,500 and 3,000 eggs a day. Okay? That'll drop off to as low as 400 to 500 in the years preceding. As a beekeeper, you don't get as much honey unless you have a lot of bees. So for the beekeeper, it's better to manage it to get more oomph. So that's one thing that's going on. Another thing that's going on is you've got the different hatch out rates. When a bee first hatches, it has a specific job. The very first job is to clean the cell it just hatched out of. Once it's cleaned that cell, and they literally sterilize the cell, they go back through. From that, they move on. A couple of days later, they start nursing other bees. So the first couple of days, just cleaning. The next couple of days could be cleaning, or they could move on to being a nurse, which is taking care of the brand new baby bees. After that, they go into a guard mode for a very short time. After that, they move on to be foragers. And once they become foragers, they'll age out and die by either being eaten by a bird or dying of old age. They literally work themselves to death. Their wings, if you see a forager, if you go through your hive, and they're the ones you'll find on flowers, but their wings are usually starting to look ragged because they've probably flown a couple of 100 miles already.
So wouldn't it make more sense for the bees to forage first until their wings become ragged and then do the nurse stuff?
No, because the problem is that the vast majority of foragers are eaten by birds.
Oh, yeah.
The most dangerous job. So they want the most dangerous job for the most expendable, which is the elderly, unfortunately. That sounds rough, but
yeah.
You don't think about it, but the average beehive is suffering anywhere between, depending on the area, it could be as low as 200, but in my area it's more like about 1,300 bird strikes a day. So you're losing 1,300 bees to birds eating them.
That's a lot of bees. A day?
A day, which is why that you really want that queen to be able to lay more than what you're losing, or you're actually shrinking the hive and not growing it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've literally on Facebook, I've seen people complain that birds have eaten their hives, like, out.
It really depends on the area. So I'm up here in Northeast Ohio. We don't have any specialized bees or specialized birds that will eat bees. You really don't have any in Virginia either. But let's say that we were to go over to Egypt or to Africa. There are birds that is their entire food source. They eat bees. That's not what you want flying around your beehives. Because they will wipe you out in a few short days.
So I guess this rounds back into what is it the job of the beekeeper to make sure the bees survive? Because everyone's freaking out because the honeybee is dying out, and is it our job as the beekeeper to make sure that those bees stay alive because they're so fragile that they can't do anything for themselves?
Yes and no. Okay. It's almost an unfair question in some respects.
I know it's a loaded question. I'm sorry.
Well, no, it's not. The thing is that if you're going to be a beekeeper, you're actively managing livestock. Okay? They're not pets, they're livestock. They're also semi-feral. Okay? They legitimately could survive without you, provided that they were in their own natural environment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But they're not. We put them in beehive boxes, which is not what they would live in nature. They would live in large hollow trees about 15 feet in the air up to about 30 feet in the air.
Mm-hmm.
Which means we're going to run into bears because a bear can't get into the tree that high. It's very uncommon for a bear to, I shouldn't say never, but it's very uncommon for a bear to go after a wild hive. But they will go after a hive that's fallen out of a tree, and they will go after your boxes as a beekeeper any chance they get, because they're very thin-walled, and it's very easy for them to get into. Okay? We also have a lot of bee diseases that have moved in the last, couple of years. Don't quote me on it, but you can look it up and fact check if you'd like. I believe it was 1987 when the varroa mite made it to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? The varroa mite, for lack of a better description, think of fleas but for bees. They survive off the hemoglobin, the blood equivalent in the bee. When they attach themselves, best way to describe it, and I'll stand up so you can see it a little bit more. See how big my hand is?
Yeah.
My fist?
Yeah.
Okay. That's about how big in comparison to the body of bee. From, here up, that's about how big a varroa mite is compared to the size of a bee. They drink a lot of hemoglobin. Okay? Because of that, the bee's immune system is weaker. Because of that injection and withdrawal that the mite does, they transmit viruses back and forth between bees. Okay? So, in the United States, where bees are technically not a native species, and neither is the varroa mite, the bees don't have any defense against the varroa mite because they didn't evolve with it, because varroa mite is actually a problem for the Asian honeybee, not the European honeybee, which is what we have as beekeepers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Jump species. If you don't try to keep them alive, then you're going to lose all of your bees. Okay? So as a beekeeper, it is your responsibility to try to keep them alive. But at the same token, again, it's an invasive species. If all of the bees in the United States died off, the varroa mite would die off too, and we could start with a clean slate. The problem is, all of the crops would fail that we usually rely on for food. Catch 22, you kind of got to do what you got to do to make it work. You have a lot of other types of bees that people don't traditionally think about as being pollinators or useful for beekeeping. But you could actually run bumblebees. You could actually use mason bees or orchard bees.
Mm-hmm.
And you could Japanese horned bees. All of which are available in the continental U.S., no problem.
And you can actually grow those in hives like honeybees, or?
Well, the bumblebee lives as a nest builder in the ground, and there's a special way of, I don't know how to describe it. You make a habitat for them.
Yeah.
Problem is that they don't come back to the same hive every year, so every year you have to do it again.
Yeah.
Okay. Mason bees, they actually, they're a type of solitary bee. They'll fill a tube like a straw.
Mm-hmm.
They'll kind of put in layers.
Yeah.
Chambers between each egg. And those are the easiest to manage because if you set it up right, what I like to do, and I don't have any at the location I'm at right now where I'd show you.
Yeah.
But you take an 8x8, drill in half-inch holes, or 3/8-inch holes going in. Get paper tubes, line those holes with paper tubes, and then at the end of the year, well, really about midsummer, you can pull those tubes off and stick them in a freezer or fridge that you've modified to hold about 40 degrees and about 60% humidity. And those bees can stay in there for up to 2 years without hurting the bees at all. But as soon as you pull them out and they come above 60 degrees temperature, they'll all hatch out and go pollinating and start the whole life cycle over again. The problem with that is it's very time consuming to do that kind of beekeeping. Okay? You're not getting a honey crop out of it, which means you're going to have the farmer pay you more to pollinate his crops. And farms do not want to pay you to pollinate the crops in the first place.
It's all about money. Let's roll back to the honeybee, because that's the primary one. And we're going to talk about the varroa mites. And there's actually a treatment for it that is pretty effective now called oxalic acid, right?
Yep, that's what I do. There's two ways to apply oxalic acid. One is to use a 3.5 weight by volume solution, 5 mils per seam, and a seam is the area between two frames.
Mm-hmm.
So 3 to 5 milliliters drizzled over the top of the bees. That is very effective if you're only doing 1 or 2 hives. Doing it that way is quick, and it's very inexpensive for a hobby beekeeper to do. The disadvantage is, if you do it wrong, you will blind the bees and burn the wings of the bees. Okay? I know that sounds terrible, but it's not that common to have something like that happen. It means you mixed the solution wrong, for one, or you over-applied. You applied more like 6 to 9 milliliters per seam. The other option is to use a vaporizer, which a vaporizer uses 1 gram per box, half a gram for every other box going up, and you don't do it while the honey supers are on. But what that does is it reaches the sublimation temperature of the oxalic acid, and it becomes a vapor, and it spreads throughout the hive and coats every single surface of the hive, okay, and crystallizes out when it cools. You get a very even distribution. It takes about 2.5 minutes per hive, so it's very quick. You don't have to open the hives up. You don't have to move things around. You just, close them in with some duct tape or some t-shirts. That's all I do. But it's down and dirty. It's quick. Oxalic acid is 70 times more poisonous to the mite than it is to the honeybee. So you have to really be wrong on dosage to hurt the bees.
And what is oxalic acid?
Well, oxalic acid is an organic acid, and it can be found in many things. A lot of times they synthesize it in a lab when you're buying it in bulk, but you could refine it from rhubarb. It's the main acid in rhubarb and spinach that gives it kind of that little bit of a bite.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's just a basic acid.
But if you use that, then you can't claim your bees are treatment free. And then, isn't that a big thing right now?
It is a big thing that people want treatment free, but as a beekeeper, you want bees not to die. Catch-22. Okay? I personally tried for a couple of years to be treatment free. Okay? I tried very, very hard to go that route. And all I successfully did was made my own life hard. It doesn't work. The simple reality of it is it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
You can cheat, okay? That doesn't mean you're treatment free. So if I split my hives constantly, okay? By splitting your hive, you're making 1 hive into 2 hives or 4 hives, but you're making multiples.
Yeah.
That interrupts the brood cycle for the honeybee itself. Interrupt the brood cycle of the honeybee interrupts the brood cycle of the mite. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a treatment, but it's a treatment. Because you've interrupted the brood cycle. So out of those splits, at least if you're going to split the hive 4 ways, which is what I do most often,
mm-hmm.
okay, at least 3 of those hives don't have any ability for that mite to continue its life cycle for at least probably 20 to 30 days.
And how long does a mite normally live?
About 15 to 18 days.
So that mite is screwed.
But it means that the level of mites in the hive, by the time the queen starts laying again and the mite cycles, because the mites attach to the baby bees, they mm-hmm. attach to the brood. Okay? Well, if there is no brood, there's nowhere for them to attach, and their life cycle starts to collapse. The advantage of that is that you can say you didn't do any treatment. The disadvantage is You need a lot more equipment, okay, because you're constantly expanding the yard. And then you can contract it again and make a smaller yard, but you'll never have as many bees as you would if you just treated, which means you'll never have as much of a honey flow caught. And if your main goal is honey, it doesn't really work. You're constantly slightly behind where you should be.
Okay. Well, could you then, in theory, get bees with better genetics, more capable of fighting the varroa or other diseases?
Well, certain universities right now and certain other private, queen breeders are doing just that. Purdue University has actually got a bee that will physically bite the legs off of the mite. Okay, they're called leg chewer bees. It's a very useful trait. It's becoming more and more popular and more common. That's the single biggest hope that we have, is that trait will do enough. Okay, but it's still never going to be as good as actually treating your bees.
Mm-hmm.
So in nature, the Asian honeybee, the way that they deal with the mite is they swarm a lot.
And that's no good.
Bees just up and go, fly off. And when that happens, you're stuck with half the bees you thought you had, no queen, and you hope that they're able to raise another queen, okay, that she's able to get bred correctly, and that everything works. It's not ideal. It's great for nature. It's not good for the beekeeper. As a beekeeper, you want honey, okay? And if your field force just left you, well, that went half your honey.
Well, we've been speaking a lot about the Asian bee. Are there other breeds of bees, types of honeybees, I mean to say?
Well, yes, and that gets complicated. Okay. There are, I want to tell you, 80,000 types of bees.
Oh, goddamn.
Okay. Many of them are solitary bees and don't really produce honey. But there's probably 15 that do produce honey in usable quantities.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Of those 15, you really don't want a few of them. So you've got the Africanized quote-unquote killer bee, okay, which is a crossbreed between Apis mellifera, speaking English, I swear, which is the European honeybee, and Apis niger, which is the African bee. Okay. The African bee all by itself isn't that bad to work with. The Asian honeybee, or the European honeybee, isn't that hard to work with. Mix the two, and you get a bee that nobody wants to work with. Okay. There's a couple of bees that are native to, like Syria, Jordan, that kind of area.
Mm-hmm.
They have some unique abilities. Some of them actually fly at night, and will pollinate like night blooming jasmine. In about 1957, they brought some of those over to New York. And I actually have a hive that has some of those trace genetics in it, because they'll fly at night, and it's very strange as a beekeeper when you see bees flying in a full moon, and you're like, why are they out? Since an Italian honeybee, which is one of the European strains, doesn't fly at night ever, and that's the most common one in the US.
One of the cons about Italian honeybees is their eyesight is just not very good to begin with.
Well, it's not just that their eyesight isn't very good to begin with. It's that they didn't evolve to do certain things. They evolved to be a good honeybee in Italy. I don't live in Italy. My climate is a lot closer to Russia. My climate is a lot closer to Slovenia. So personally, I'm running mostly Caucasian bees, okay, which actually come from the Caucasus Mountain region.
And that's a very interesting choice, because Caucasian bees are primarily known for their wax-making ability, not their honey-making ability.
Well, my main thing is that I produce a lot of wax. When I first started doing this, my primary goal was not honey. My primary goal was actually wax. I make lotion bars, and I sell a lot of things like that on our website and at different craft fairs. So that was my goal, was wax.
And see, that's interesting because when most people think of honeybees, they think of honey, and you went straight for the wax. Can you explain that reasoning a little bit?
Well, there's a couple of advantages and disadvantages, and a couple of reasons. But that type of bee, the Caucasian bee, they make wax faster than any of the other strains. So while they don't make a lot of honey, they do make a lot of wax. So when you're just building up your apiaries, you need more wax. So it's a good idea at that point to have Caucasian bees, and then take away the comb that they've built because they built it faster, and give it to something like a Italian bee, which makes more honey.
Yeah.
And you can play that kind of horse trader game and end up with a larger crop that way. Excuse me. The other advantage is there are certain types of nectar and certain type of flowers that a honeybee can't normally access. Their tongues are too short. But one of the typical traits that distinguishes Caucasian honeybees from Italian honeybees is they have a physically longer proboscis. They can actually reach further into the flower and draw nectar. So I'm on a lot of swamp here, and one of the common flowers that we have is honeysuckle. Another one of the common flowers that we have in our area is Rose of Sharon. Neither of which are useful at all to a normal Italian bee, but the Caucasian bees will work them just fine. So there's an advantage to that. There's also a couple of different clovers that you run into the same problem. Red clover isn't always accessible to Italian bees, but it's always accessible to a Caucasian bee. Same thing with alsike and a couple others. So there's advantages. They also do slightly better in the north in the winters. Eventually, you're probably going to be running them down south, where you're at, but they're not going to have quite the same advantage down there as they do up here. As far as overwintering, it won't make that big of a difference to you.
Well, right now, as a new beekeeper, the thing is I want them to build wax faster.
Yeah. Which I totally get.
That's the slowest part, actually, as starting up, is when the bees don't have wax. They have to build all of that, and it's like, everyone's talking about when are you going to get honey, and I'm just like, when are they going to build the comb to put the honey in?
One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is for every pound of wax that you take away from a hive, you lost 9 pounds of honey. But that's about the ratio. Anywhere between, depending on your area, 5 to 9 pounds to make 1 pound of wax. And that can be a real burden on a beehive. It's definitely a burden on the beekeeper. So, I mean, there's different aspects. There's different things going on. Even that can be helped. One of the things that I'll be doing next year, because I'm really dorky and a little too into beekeeping, I'm honest, there's a couple of different places that sell ventilators that you put on the top of the hives. And it literally uses a standard PC fan, a solar panel, and a thermocoupler. And you set it, and at a certain temperature, it turns on the fan and pulls the moisture and heat right out of the top of the supers, which is where the honey is at on the beehive. Okay? The advantage to that is that you don't need as many bees trying to dry out the honey because you're drying it out for them. Okay? Sounds silly, but you get a 25 to 50% increase in honey production.
I'm just like, why is this the first time I'm hearing about this? No. That's great.
All my dorky little things that I'm going to do.
If all you need is a PC fan, I mean, gosh, I have like 6 of those laying around right now.
It's not as complicated as people. Big thing is you need something to regulate temperature, as far as telling the temperature. Beehives hold a very specific temperature. They're going between 32 and 35 Celsius. They don't want to go hotter. They don't want to go colder.
What is that in Fahrenheit?
80? Oh, I can't remember.
Isn't it like 85 to like 90, something like that?
Yeah, basically 85 to 92 or something.
Yeah.
Somewhere in there. That's the ballpark anyway. Above that, and you cook the brood. Below that, you chill the brood. Either way, you collapse the beehive. So you don't want your fan running so hard that it chills the brood box.
No, I get that, yeah.
Something to tinker with. I know several other beekeepers that are running something like that, and I don't have the details on me at the moment. But, that's going to be one of the next toys I play with. I'm going to run a couple of experimental hives next year where I'm going to use a 2-queen system.
Mm-hmm.
Put that on top of the shared super and see just how much honey I can get those 2 beehives to make.
So you're doing a lot of things that traditional beekeepers wouldn't even touch.
Well, it depends on what you consider a traditional beekeeper, okay? I would argue that what I'm doing is actually the most traditional of beekeeping.
Mm-hmm. Why is that?
Most beekeepers traditionally, if you go back in history, kept their bees in a couple of locations around their own property, okay? But they didn't ship them all over the country, and they tinkered with them. So if you look at the different types of hives throughout history, okay, used everything from what they call a bee gum, which is literally just a log that's been hollowed out, and they put some bees inside of it, and then they crushed it to get the wax and killed the bees. You can do the same thing with a scap, which is the traditional, you think, Winnie the Pooh woven basket. Those, to get the honey out, they literally smoked it with sulfur, killing the bees. Okay. Took out the honeycomb, crushed the honeycombs, separated the wax from the honey, and that was how they harvested it then. The traditional Longstrath box, which is what modern beekeepers think of as the beehive, the little square white that sit in the fields. Mm-hmm. Those have removable frames, and the bees don't have to be harmed at all to get the honey out of it or to manage it.
Well, that just seems better in the long run. If you have to restart a hive every time to get honey, that just seems like a waste of time and energy.
It is. And it is definitely better to have the Longstrath setups. But the point is that all of those different methods, the ancient Greeks, they used literally nothing more complicated than terracotta pipes. Mm-hmm. It's just a pipe. In fact, I've got one around here somewhere. It's illegal to use in my state because it doesn't have removable frames. But it's still a fun curiosity. Most states require that you have removable frames so that you can inspect for bee diseases.
Yeah, the varroa mite is a major issue nowadays.
Well, the varroa mite isn't the worst thing that could happen to a beehive either. There's a bee disease called American foul brood, and traditionally the treatment for a hive if you catch American foul brood is to set it on fire.
Yeah,
seriously.
No, you're right. I've seen it done where they'll light multiple hives and big bonfires.
Now, the other options that you can use in the modern world if you have that disease is you can also treat it. Ohio is one of the states that will allow you to suppress that illness using straight up over-the-counter antibiotics. Let me move. I'm getting the sunlight. Ohio will let you treat using antibiotics. Federal law last year changed, so as of the first of the year this year, you're not going to be able to buy those. You're going to need to go to a vet, and they'll have to prescribe them. There's a lot of beekeepers in this country that are going to have a rude awakening when that happens because they've been on that chemical treadmill for so long that they don't realize how sick their bees are because they've been suppressing for so long. Mm-hmm. The other option that you have is cobalt radiation. You can literally sterilize the beehive with no bees in it, mind you, by firing high-intensity cobalt radiation through the beehive, which destroys the viruses, bacteria, spores, or anything else alive in there. The other option you have is what I do, which is I use a very concentrated ozone. The advantage to the ozone is the ozone actually oxidizes the chemicals within the wax as well. which destroys any of the pesticides or anything else that might be causing you problems.
Now, that wouldn't be recommended unless you know what you're doing or you put in good research, because ozone is dangerous. There's no simple way to put it.
Well, not only is ozone silly dangerous, but it's a lot of ozone. Yeah, if I didn't have expertise in that subject, I wouldn't be doing that. There's a bunch of different papers that are all written about how you can use ozone to sterilize beehives, and most of them are kind of inconclusive as far as how well it works outside of a lab. So small scale, it's a very good option, but if you wanted to scale it up to the size of a commercial operation, it simply wouldn't work. You can do if you made a big enough unit, you could realistically do 25 hives at a time, 25 boxes, I should say. But past 25 boxes, that's just not a workable scenario.
Well, if you don't do it right, the ozone will literally dissolve your boxes, too.
If you do it right, the ozone's dissolving your boxes. I mean, that's just the reality of it. But wood is cheap compared to losing your whole operation to having one of those illnesses.
And like we just mentioned, the wax is the expensive part, too. So if you can reuse the wax, that's always a win.
So I have a friend of mine who, last spring, he got caught up in the orange blossom sprays because he takes his bees from Ohio to Florida, which I don't personally agree with, but you do what you got to do to stay alive and eat.
Mm-hmm.
He's a full-time beekeeper, and he went all the way down, got caught up in the sprays on those oranges. Okay, he went from 200 hives to about 20 hives because the pesticide wiped him out. He didn't know what to do, so I built that ozonator, or I should say I built a second ozonator slightly larger to help him. And since he's back up to 200 hives, later today we're going to go down and help him do some more beekeeping.
Actually, speaking of pesticides and whatnot, I just recently saw that France actually banned pesticides that can potentially kill honeybees. What is your thoughts on that? Do you think it's the responsibility to use pesticides safe on crops that are bee safe, or what's your opinion?
Well, okay, so again, this is where I'm kind of like of two minds, because I work as a chemist, so I'm not afraid of chemicals if used correctly. And I'm a beekeeper, so I don't want my bees to ever be endangered.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But the reality is properly used pesticides, it's not that big of a threat to a honeybee. Okay? I'm going to give you a good example, which is spraying a wheat field or a corn field.
Okay.
Okay? My bees will never be in either of those fields.
Okay.
There's no sugar source there. There's no flowers there.
Okay.
Okay. If they spray those things in the afternoon or in the evening, better even yet, because it's possible that a bee might go to get pollen from the corn. Okay? It's possible, depending, they might even try to get pollen from the wheat. It's not likely, but it is possible. So if they were to spray just before it gets dark, okay, the bees are already back in the hives. There's no risk to the bees whatsoever when that happens. Okay?
Okay.
So I don't really have a problem with pesticide spray if they're doing it right.
What about like on the almond orchards where you can actually have the beehives in between all the trees and yet they're still spraying the trees?
Well, that doesn't happen as often as people think. Okay? Mostly because the almond sprays aren't pesticides; they're fungicides.
Okay.
Okay. Now, this is a shortcoming with the EPA and a shortcoming with the nation as a whole as far as how we run agriculture. Okay. We only call it poisonous to the animal, to the bee, if it kills the adult bee who got physically sprayed.
Mm-hmm.
They track what happens to the colony, only the individual bee. Well, fungicides don't hurt adult bees. What happens is the adult bees track the fungicide back into the hive. Bees are actually eating something called bee bread, which is what they feed their young.
That's a pollen, right?
Which is a mixture of pollen and honey, okay, or pollen and nectar, depending.
Yeah.
And that's what they feed young bees, okay? But it's a fermented product. It has yeast in it. It has probiotics.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. By the adult bees bringing in a whole bunch of fungicides and contaminating the bee bread, it collapses the colony. I'm probably remembering the name wrong, so you'd have to Google it. I believe it's matrasan.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a couple of different brands of fungicides, but a few of them are more common in my area. They use them on apples a lot to spray on the buds so that they get better fruit. Me and several other beekeepers in my area will now refuse to pollinate your crops if you spray that stuff. It is 100% fatal at 8 months. Everything looks hunky-dory. It looks like your bees did just fine. 8 months later, every bee in your colony will be dead and the hive will be empty. Now, when you say that fungicide is what killed them, now you're in for arguments. Because even though we can say every time you spray it, in 8 months I lose a colony, the federal government, the way they do the regulation, will say that we're wrong and it's perfectly safe for honeybees. But it kills the honeybees. Like,
Mm-hmm.
There's how many colonies do you have to lose before you figure out what the actual link is? Yeah. I understand you can't repeat it in the lab very well. And again, they don't test it on brood. But, I mean, I know a guy who lost, what the hell did he lose? I think it was 800 colonies over 2 years.
So your stance is you're just not going to pollinate places that use these kind of pesticides. Fungicides.
Yeah. The pesticides, again, properly applied pesticides are very safe. Most pesticides dry in about 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And once they've dried, they're not really particularly removable. Okay?
Okay.
So, again, if you spray it in the evening, I'm never getting my bees exposed to it.
Okay.
So it's exposure. It's like Roundup, okay? You'll hear a lot of people in the beekeeping community talk about how Roundup is the worst thing ever.
Yeah.
Okay? Roundup doesn't kill a beehive, ever. I literally know somebody who just the other day, some idiot sprayed his entire hive with Roundup. Okay? Because he was right on a field edge and they were doing something in the field and they ran over his beehives with Roundup. Okay? This is the second year in a row they did it to him. Okay? Other than wanting to rinse the hive off because you personally don't want to deal with Roundup, it's really not going to hurt the bees. I'm not going to tell you it's good for the bees because it's probably not good for anything. But it's not fatal. It's not something that's going to kill you.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Now, I will say that you take the extra caution in that particular beehive, okay? That wax will get treated with the oxidizer. I'll use the ozone on it, okay? And the honey in that hive will be destroyed. We won't use it for anything.
Yeah.
And we definitely make sure that we tell the farmer how wrong it is and never do that again, because you don't want to set a precedent where they think that abusing your beehives is okay. But realistically, it's not that big a deal.
I want to take a moment before you have to go, since I know you have a tight schedule today. I want to talk about some other useful things that honeybees have that not many people know about, like propolis, for example. I want you to talk a little bit about propolis.
Okay. Propolis, for lack of a better description, is the glue that beehives glue the hive together.
Mm-hmm.
It's a mixture of plant resins and different essential oils, pollens, waxes. It's kind of a strange substance, but propolis is
Not
about
fun to when they glue everything together, though. I said not fun when they glue everything together, though.
It's just part of the experience. Caucasian bees are the most prolific at using propolis. They glue everything together, so I'm probably a little jaded because at this point I'm just so used to dealing with hives solidly propolized.
Yeah.
It is what it is. But the big thing is that propolis is about as let me start over. Propolis is about as effective as penicillin against most bacteria. Okay? But the big difference is because of the way it's made, because it's a mixture of different plant matter, nothing will ever become resistant to propolis because every batch is different. Okay? So it's very, very effective if you get sick to take some. But it's an underutilized resource. Not too long ago, there was a paper where they just found out that propolis is one of the few things that will actually kill MRSA, multi-resistant staph.
Oh. Not fun stuff.
Not fun stuff, but dies when you use propolis. So that's one product from a hive you can use. You have pollen itself, people take for allergies, so you can harvest pollen. In fact, that's what I'll be doing later today, is putting on pollen traps. We have about 50 of them to add. Pollen can help with allergies, but pollen is a very strong protein source. So if you've got somebody who they insist on being a vegetarian, you can give them a little bit of protein by giving them pollen.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Very useful. Of course, you've got honey. Okay. Different honeys have different uses. Again, if you see stuff with a lot of peroxide on it, most often that can be used for wound care as well as, sweetening your tea. Okay. Put a little bit of it on wounds and the wound will heal up much quicker because it gives it a sugar source, which ends up letting cells absorb a little bit of sugar and helps them heal faster, as well as keeping it sterile. Okay. You have the wax, of course. You make candles. You can do all kinds of things with that. Everything from shoe polish to candles to lip balms and everything else. Let's see, what else do you have? You have venom, of course. There's several ways to harvest venom without actually hurting the bees, but the easiest one is, for lack of a better description, it's a wedge-shaped taser. Set it in front of the beehive, and it uses a very high voltage but very, very low amperage shock. And the first bee that touches it gets shocked, in turn stings it, and that sting has a scent marker. Those pheromones then tell all the other bees, hey, this is an enemy, sting it too. And by the end of the experience, over about 45 minutes, you'll have about 80,000 bees sting that plate. Okay. That venom can then be collected off of the glass plate, processed, and they've successfully used it to treat malaria and HIV. So the venom is very useful for medicines.
Why don't we hear more about these products? I mean, besides like Burt's Bees. I mean, everyone loves Burt's Bees chapstick, but why is propolis, seems useful? I've also seen it on like some Amazon listings and like the little capsules and whatnot. Would you recommend someone like ordering something like that, or what is?
If it sits on a shelf for a very long time, it can, just like any other drug, start to lose its effectiveness.
Okay.
So in a real world, you want fresh propolis from a beekeeper that you know. Okay. In a pinch, I would go ahead and buy it at any good quality store that's selling it, but it just depends on what you're trying to do. Okay. A good example of where the drugstore stuff comes in handy. Propolis was actually the first fillings. Okay.
For teeth?
For teeth.
Oh.
So about 6 months ago, I had a friend of mine on Facebook who's a trucker, and I grew up with him. And somewhere out in Arizona, he broke a tooth. Okay. propolis is common enough that you'll find it at almost every drugstore if you look.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So I had him go buy a bottle of propolis, open up the little pills, and make it into a gum. Just add a little water and swirl it. And I had him fill his own tooth with propolis. That's not a permanent filling by any means, but because the propolis is antibiotic, what it'll do is it will instantly stop the pain because it seals the wound and it stops the nerve from being exposed. Okay? But it will also keep it from becoming infected because you're packing it with an antibiotic, basically. Okay? That let him drive all the way back to Northeast Ohio to go see his dentist.
Oh, that's really cool, actually.
If he had to get a dentist to do stuff out there, they told him it was going to be about $1,600 to fix his teeth.
Yeah.
Versus doing it with his normal dentist, which is, covered under his
Insurance, yeah.
And was very, very inexpensive. I think it was like $70.
Yeah.
So, knowing how to use it is just as important as knowing what it is.
Oh.
Bee venom is actually pretty funny because it is becoming more popular, but not here. It's more popular in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
In Europe, you're seeing it show up in cosmetics as a lip plumping agent or as a substitute for Botox. Okay. Over here, they're starting to use more of the research because they found out that it is antiviral, that it will stop the spread of HIV. And right now they're in the process of using bee venom. They're extracting one of the proteins, which is the one responsible for its actual function in that respect, and they're going to start trying to add it to the lubricant of condoms. I don't know why you're laughing. It's a very smart thing to do, because what it means is that the condoms will not only be spermicidal, but they will also by themselves destroy any of the STDs that would be spread.
No, it's brilliant. I didn't realize there's so many little known uses for honeybees.
That's not little known. Those are very large uses and very well researched.
Uh-huh.
The big difference is that venom extraction, for example, is very time consuming, and it's not something that an industrial beekeeper who's transporting their bees on trucks is going to have the capability of doing. So that falls to somebody who's doing things more my style.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's very lucrative, but it's very labor intensive.
Well, yeah, you have to get it, within a certain amount of time that the bees start stinging it and all that other stuff,
Well, and have a little bit more knowledge than some of the average beekeepers.
Mm-hmm.
80,000 bee stings on a glass plate, okay? If you cut yourself with that glass plate, if you were standing in front of the ER, you're not going to make it. 1,500 bee stings is absolutely lethal. 80,000 bee stings, no question.
So don't cut yourself.
So you have the proper safety equipment.
Yeah.
Okay. When I harvest it, I have Kevlar cut-proof gloves. Okay. I have Kevlar cut-proof sleeves.
Is the glass really that sharp?
No, I've dulled every edge on it until it is absolutely as dull as I can make it. And I use safety glass, laminated safety glass.
Yeah.
But again, accidents happen. And if you have an accident with that, you're dead.
Fair enough. Yeah.
There's no forgiveness, because I don't care if you gave yourself the EpiPen the second you cut yourself with it. It doesn't matter. It's absolutely a lethal dose. Okay?
I mean, it's kind of funny, like, when you think about it, because it's like these bees, it's like, there's so many, like, things to them, they give us honey, they give us, antibiotics, all this, and at the same time, they can kill you if they want to.
Actually, right now, one of the single most promising things that I've run across is some of the studies and research they're doing on Lyme's disease. I mean, honestly, I think the treatment is a little bit ridiculous, but give them a few years and they'll refine it down better. But there are people who are suffering from MS and Lyme's disease who get bee stings regularly, normally the protocol they use is 10 bee stings down the length of their spine every other day.
Yeah.
Okay? They build up to that, mind you. They don't start off that level, but they build up to that. But I have personally seen people go from wheelchairs to walkers, from walkers to running marathons. So personally, I believe in it enough that at this point I'm trying to convince my mother to do it. She's not in great health. And if I ever got anything like that, I'm damn sure going to get stung. The science is just too strong behind it. A lot of it is anecdotal, but that's because most of the people who have the money to do the research aren't interested in it.
Well, and another thing is, like, what people don't realize is, like, so many people are like, oh, I don't want to get stung by a bee. And, I mean, it sucks. I'm not trying to say it doesn't suck. But, like, it really only sucks for, like, 5 minutes, and then you just have swelling. At least from my experience.
That's the bee.
Wait, what?
That's on the bee.
Yeah. Oh, that's true.
So, guard bees have the most potent venom. Nurses have the weakest venom. Okay? I could take you to certain hives I have that would make you take a knee. I have hives in my backyard that if you got stung, you would question whether you got stung.
Oh.
I had one hive that stung me, and I really didn't think they stung me. Because I'm looking at the stinger sticking out of my hand, and, when a bee stings you, it leaves basically its venom sac and everything else behind, flies off the dye. And I'm thinking, man, it stung me. And I was waiting for the pain to hit, pulled the stinger out, but it never hurt. It was just a very weak strain.
Yeah.
I have another hive who is absolutely the most gentle hive, but holy crap, when they sting you, it is awful. They don't sting you often, but when they sting you, it is horrible.
Does that hive produce a lot of honey?
Honestly, it doesn't produce as much honey as it could, but it is so darn gentle that I just really can't complain that much. Eventually, just by doing our own queen breeding back and forth, I want to keep the genetics of that colony.
Mm-hmm.
They're just that gentle. They are very calm.
Wow.
They're very work with. It's awful when you get stung.
Well, if you get stung, you messed up.
But that's exactly it, because it's very, very gentle. I've had that colony for 2 years, and I believe I've been stung once. Well, twice. I've been stung twice.
Let's really quickly, this might be getting a little off topic a little bit, but could you explain to me exactly what the smoker's for when the beekeeper gets in the hive?
Sure. When you go into a beehive, bees communicate almost exclusively by pheromone. Okay? When a bee stings you or is injured, it'll release a pheromone telling its friends basically to attack this person, it's an enemy, or be on the alert, something is going on. Okay? By smoking the hive, what you're doing is you're interrupting that means of communication.
Mm-hmm.
It's simple.
Okay.
What'll happen if your smoke is a little too hot, okay, you can cause them to be a little more upset, but generally a nice cold smoke going through the hive will also tell them that there's a possibility that there's a fire in the area. And what they'll do is they'll fill up their honey stomachs, okay? Well, when they have full honey stomachs, they don't fly as well. They'll fly, but they don't fly as well, which is another advantage to the beekeeper himself, because if they're not really trying to fly, because they're kind of lousing about, as well. So, I mean, that's the function of the smoke. And then there's different sources of smoke. Again, you don't necessarily always want to use pine, because that can tend to be hot.
Yeah.
But you don't want to use hardwood either all the time. A mixture of both works well. What I like to use personally is pellets from a pellet stove.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yep.
Good. Alternatively, my personal preference and the best smoke that I like is you use sumac, the red sumac plants.
Mm-hmm.
cut the berry cluster off and let that dry out, and those smoke really, really well.
I don't know if we have those off the top of my head here.
You do. It grows everywhere in the continental United States.
Okay, thank you, smartass.
It is what it is. Actually makes a very like a light tea, kind of similar to pink lemonade if you make it right. And if you go off Middle Eastern cooking, they dry it out, put it in a spice grinder, and they grind it over food, and it kind of gives you the same effect as lemon zest.
Let's see. Is there anything else you can think about? You want to tell me about the bees before we wrap this up?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's a very complicated subject. You know, anybody who ever tells you they know everything about bees is wrong right off the top, just because it's too complicated of a subject to ever really know anything in its entirety about. Okay? And it's constantly changing. We're learning new things as we realize, you know, what we thought previously was wrong. Okay? So, the best I can tell you is it's a constantly changing field. You know, colony collapse disorder is a good example. Okay? For a long time, they blamed colony collapse disorder for the bees going away.
Mm-hmm.
We've discovered that colony collapse disorder was most likely a brand new virus that we'd never seen in the United States that was going through our colonies in a virgin field environment. Because our colonies had never been exposed, they had no resistance to it. Okay? Now, 10 years later, I've never personally seen a hive that I couldn't figure out what killed it. But everybody still says colony collapse disorder, and mostly colony collapse disorder has become beekeeper speak for I don't know why they died. Okay? That's not really a good thing, because it's got a lot of people thinking that bees are in free fall and collapse, when the truth is that the average beekeeper has no idea what he's doing as far as being able to diagnose an illness or being able to figure out what's wrong in the colony. Okay? We're not going to lose all of the bees in the United States. It's not realistic. It's not honest to say that we are. Okay? But at the same token, we do need to have beekeepers who become more educated about the subject. One of the problems that we face in beekeeping right now is our own solution is wrong. Many people become beekeepers with an idealistic want to save the honeybees. Okay? And that's great because it's noble, and I totally support people trying to do their part to save the world. But the problem is they want to be treatment-free, which doesn't work. And when they realize it doesn't work, they just keep doing it. They don't take the time to learn what their mistakes are. They don't take the time to actually figure out, like, okay, well, I lost my colony this year. What killed it? It's not really helpful if you're just going to let your bees die every year. The mites are a great example. I treat with oxalic acid. Okay, and because of it, I have about a 90% survival rate over winter. Sometimes higher, sometimes lower, but on average.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And that's compared to the average beekeeper of 30% loss.
Or less.
Or less.
Because I know people that lose every bee every year. It's just honest. They don't want to treat. Every bee dies every year. The other thing I run into, especially in the hives I have in my own neighborhood, where I'm at right now, because other beekeepers have bees as close as a half a mile from me, okay? If they don't treat in about the end to middle of October, just before it gets real cold up here, their beehives will collapse, and all of their bees will move to my hives, and all of a sudden, I have problems now, because I've gotten all of their infected refugees.
That's crazy.
So in essence, even though they think they're doing a good thing, what they're actually doing is screwing every other beekeeper around them because they don't want to treat. It's a tragedy, but, again, their heart's in the right place. I don't want to say that they're not doing a good thing, but they're not willing to learn the right way. They're not willing to apply science. And just like we talked about earlier, the fear of pesticides, they're afraid of any chemical. And that's one of the things that in beekeeping it really needs addressed, and people need to start understanding that not all chemicals are bad, used properly. Really does come down to use properly. It's...
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you for your time. I